Good morning. Welcome to our worship service at the First Unitarian Church of Worcester, Massachusetts. I'm Jay Lavelle, a lay leader and coordinator of summer services. Good morning to those of you worshiping with us from home, and good morning to those of you who are here in the sanctuary. I am leading worship this morning with our musician, Andrew Pack, our broadcast technician, Eugene Rossi, and our usher, Kate Sheehan. Ken Mandile will be preaching today. Here at First Unitarian, we strive in loving fellowship to honor the sacred, connect with each other, and serve justice. We are a welcoming congregation. Whatever your age, race, class, nationality, sexual orientation, or gender identity, we are delighted to have you with us this morning. We are worshiping as one congregation in many places. We have people here in the sanctuary and people joining us online. If you're here in the sanctuary while keeping your mask on, feel free to participate in all the unison prayers and readings and sing the hymns. If you're at home, the words to readings and hymns will appear on your screen so you can join in as well. We will have a social hour with snacks. Depending on the weather, it will either be in the garden or in the Bancroft room, which is through this door. If you are in the Bancroft room, please keep your mask on. You do not have to wear your mask outside. And if you're online, you can like this video to help others find us and subscribe to our YouTube channel to find more content. And please add a comment in the comments section on YouTube in the space below the video. We want to hear from each one of you. You can stay connected to the church through our website, firstunitarian.com, our Facebook page, and our newsletter. The newsletter is the best way to stay in touch and join our other programs. If you would like to receive our e-newsletter, please go to firstunitarian.com and click subscribe to our newsletter at the bottom of any page. And we have one announcement this morning that the garden tour scheduled for this afternoon has been canceled.
Good morning. Thank you all for coming or watching online. This is the day the Lord has made. In the spirit of love, we light this chalice. Please rise if you are able to join in the covenant of the church. In the love of truth and the spirit of Jesus, we unite for the worship of God and the service of all. Please join me in our responsive reading, number 470 in the gray hymnal. We affirm the unfailing renewal of life. We affirm the steady growth of human companionship. We affirm a continuing hope. Now, please join me in our first hymn, number 347 in the gray hymnal, Gather the Spirit. be seated. Kimberly Rochelle Hampton, who died peacefully on Saturday, July 10th of endometrial cancer. Her leadership in Unitarian Universalism included her time as our ministerial intern in the 2010s. Many of us remember her passionate voice and steadfast activism. Her memorial service will be held on Thursday and will stream live at 12 noon Eastern Time. Reverend Sarah will share details as she has them. We commend Kim's spirit to a loving God and ask for comfort for all who mourn. Please continue your own thoughts and prayers in silence. In our time of prayer and meditation, we reach out to one another in compassion as we say together the prayer of Jesus. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Our ministries at First Unitarian Church continue to thrive because of your support. To support all that we do as a church, text 844-906-2338, followed by the amount you wish to donate. You can also go to firstunitarian.com and click Give Online at the top of any page. If you are in the sanctuary, you can use your phone to read the QR code in the order of service to go directly to our PayPal page, or place a donation in the basket at either door. I invite your generous contributions for the good work of First Unitarian Church. Our first reading this morning is called Nobody But You by Charles Bukowski. Nobody can save you but yourself. You will be put again and again into nearly impossible situations. They will attempt again and again through subterfuge, guise, and force to make you submit, quit, and or die quietly inside. Nobody can save you but yourself. And it will be easy enough to fail so very easily. But don't. Just watch them. Just listen to them. Do you want to be like that? A faceless, mindless, heartless being? Do you want to experience death before death? Nobody can save you but yourself, and you're worth saving. It's not a war easily won, but if anything is worth winning, then this is it. Think about it. Think about saving yourself, your spiritual self, your gut self, your singing magical self, and your beautiful self. Save it. Don't join the dead in spirit. Maintain yourself with humor and grace, and finally, if necessary, wager your life as you struggle. Damn the odds, damn the price. Only you can save yourself. Do it. Do it. Then you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Please rise for our second hymn, number 140 in the gray hymnal, Hail the Glorious Golden City. Please be seated. Our second reading this morning is from Virginia Heffernan called The Tyranny of Habit No More. Humans are not generally disposed to radical departures from their daily rounds, but the recent fantasy of optimizing a life for peak performance, productivity, efficiency has created a cottage industry that tries to make the dreariest possible life sound heroic. Jordan Peterson has been commanding lost male souls to make their beds for years now. The 4-hour work week, the power of habit, and atomic habits urge readers to automate certain behaviors to keep them dutifully overworking and undereating. But COVID-19 suggests that Peterson or any other habit-preaching martinet is not the leader for our time. Instead, consider Albert Camus, who in The Plague blames the obliteration of a fictional Algerian town by an epidemic on one thing: consistency. The truth is, Camus writes of the crushingly dull port town, everyone is bored and devotes himself to cultivating habits. The habit-bound townspeople lack imagination. It takes them far too long to take in that death is stalking them, and it's past time to stop taking the streetcar, working for money, bowling, and going to the movies. Maybe, as in Camus' time, it will take the dual specters of autocracy and disease to get us to listen to our common sense, our imaginations, our eccentricities, and not our programming. This current plague time might see a recharged commitment to a closer to the bone world view that recognizes that we have a short time on earth. The doomsday clock is a minute from midnight, and living peacefully and meaningfully together is going to take much more than bed making and canny investments. There's a popular myth that it takes 21 days to create or to break a habit. The claim has been around for many years, and one would probably have a hard time dispelling that myth from those who have believed it for so long. The myth itself has become a habit, but the 21-day habit rule is just a myth. The truth is, it takes on average 66 days to create or break a habit. Some people can do it faster, some will take longer. It's also dependent on the effort required, the pain involved, and the source of the motivation regarding the habit. The past 17 months have given many of us a chance to break some old habits and to develop new habits, some of which we may now regret. Forced distancing, closed restaurants and entertainment venues, schools, churches, and offices meant that our daily routines were seriously disturbed. The tyranny of our routine was crushed by our new lives under the pandemic rules. When wearing masks was first mandated, it probably took me at least 2 months before I would automatically grab a mask on my way out the door in the morning. And many times I'd realize my mistake when I was partway to work, and I'd have to turn around, go home and get one, because I did not want to wear one of those dreaded blue disposable masks. But once masks were no longer required, I still had a sense of discomfort when I left the house without one. And eventually I took to leaving one in my car just to quell the stress of not having it when I walked out the door. I will say that I did too good a job of breaking the habit, because halfway up, Diane mentioned to me that I did not bring a mask. So today I have a dreaded disposable mask. The eventual end of the pandemic, which still seems to be some distance off, will offer us a chance to reset our routines, to reconsider what our daily lives should look like now that our old routines have been broken. What a shame it would be to reform our old habits at the expense of our new habits without assessing which are preferable. A resetting doesn't mean going back to where we were before the shutdown, but to clean out the clutter. Close the apps we're not using. Empty the trash can file. Clear the cache. You get the idea. Reset our priorities. Find new ways to live our values, and focus on what and who are really important in our lives. So this morning I want to talk about some of the possibilities that we have when we finally do emerge from the pandemic. We have possibilities for a better society, to better ourselves, to nurture our spiritual selves. I'm going to focus on the positive changes that are possible. There is no question that the pandemic will leave many scars on society, on our institutions, and on individuals, particularly those who have lost loved ones to the virus or who will be left with physical effects from the disease, and those who have been financially devastated. We cannot and should not be blind to this suffering, but we can still imagine a better world after COVID. Very early in the COVID pandemic, prognosticators began to imagine what life would be like when the pandemic was over. Looking back, it seems silly that we should have been thinking about the end of the pandemic while it was still in its infancy. The early prognosticators made wild guesses about whether we would forever wear masks. Will we continue to suffer wave after wave of outbreaks of various viruses? Will the long haulers fully recover? How long will survivors have immunity? When will all the jobs come back? And what jobs will be in demand in a post-COVID world? And what will those jobs look like? Are movie theaters ever going to reopen? Will people ever want to fly again or take a cruise or eat at a restaurant? I'm not a big believer in prognosticators of any sort. Most are overly pessimistic. Few are ever accurate. Yogi Berra warned us to never make predictions, especially about the future. When thinking about the future, I prefer the Stoic view expressed by Marcus Aurelius. Never let the future disturb you. You will meet it if you have to, with the same weapons of reason which today arm you against the present. In the past year, we've learned new ways to do everyday tasks, to communicate and connect with others, new ways to worship, to learn, to work. We've learned a lot about what is really necessary in our lives. We were forced to slow down. We walked, we cooked, we read, we did puzzles, we did home repairs, we planted gardens, we learned, we had quiet time with ourselves. Epidemics and pandemics disrupt the natural rhythm of our lives, and perhaps sometimes we need that rhythm to be disrupted in order to reset our priorities. History gives us many examples of how diseases have altered our world. In the middle of the 14th century, the plague called the Black Death killed almost half of the European population and perhaps as much as a third of the world population. It hit the city-dwelling peasant population and peasant farmers particularly hard. When the plague ended, though, the world was changed in a way that favored the peasants. The peasants were the essential workers of their time, and with their loss, there was a severe shortage of labor. European lords were forced to pay the peasant farmers more for their labor, and the peasants were able to negotiate better deals for themselves. Here's how a medievalist website describes the newfound power of the peasants after the plague. Quote, "They were able to acquire more wealth and freedom as the importance of their labor was increasingly recognized in the face of its loss. Goods and activities that had only been available to those with money were suddenly being taken up by peasants and other members of the lower classes. They used their newfound wealth to buy fancier clothes, eat nicer food, and take up leisure activities like hunting. The English poet John Gower lamented that laborers who were used to eating bread made of corn were now able to eat that made of wheat. And those that had previously drunk water were now enjoying luxuries like milk and cheese. He also complained about their new fancier attire and their choice to dress above their station. His attitude was common among some in the upper and middle classes who lamented the social improvements of the lives of peasants and the loss of the good old days before the plague, when the world was well ordered and people knew their place, unquote. This economic rebalancing likely contributed to the birth of the Renaissance, which came soon after the Black Death. This era of cultural, artistic, and political, scientific, and economic rebirth would last almost 300 years. And massive death and suffering from the plague caused people to question religious orthodoxy. The Protestant Reformation began only 60 years after the Black Death. 450 years later, the yellow fever that killed Napoleon's forces in Haiti spared the Haitian slaves who were immune to the disease. The Haitian slave rebellion was and is the only successful slave rebellion in history. Without yellow fever, it likely would have failed. The rebellion led to Haitian independence, freed the slaves, caused the French to abandon the New World, resulted in the Louisiana Purchase, and doubling the size of the United States. Some historians point to a similar reset and upheaval after World War I and the influenza of 1918. We refer to that time as the Roaring Twenties, or the Jazz Age. It was a time of liberation from the restrictions of the Victorian past. Sexual mores, music, dance, gender roles, hairstyles, and dress all went through revolutionary changes. It was a time of prosperity and excess for many. Mass entertainment prospered on radio and in theater. There were many social problems during the 20s that make today's issues seem tame, but society was changed after the 1918 pandemic in ways that still affect us today. So what are our opportunities for the post-COVID world? What lessons will advance you beyond the crisis? What does it mean for our spiritual lives? It's already becoming obvious that some of our workplaces, our schools, healthcare systems will be different because the old models have been upended. We've accelerated the adoption of new technology, particularly for communication, vaccine development, diagnostics, and treatment of respiratory illnesses. These are advancements that will continue to reward us in years to come. But while these may make our lives better in ways, they're really just an acceleration of what was already coming. What about values of society as a whole? How will our society learn from our suffering? The University of Waterloo in Canada has created a website called World After COVID. They surveyed 57 academics and scientists for their opinions on the wisdom gained during the pandemic. One contributor to the project is Jennifer Lerner, professor of public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. She expects that social connectedness will grow stronger. She says, quote, "I think that a positive benefit that is already coming and will, I hope, continue out of the pandemic is the recognition of how valuable community is. As the basic building block of social capital, many people who are now learning who their neighbors are, even though they didn't know their neighbors before, because we've discovered that we need them. And people who are in many different social clubs, social support groups, and community organizations are doing better in the pandemic because they're receiving help." Unquote. These are changes that should stick long after our supply of hand sanitizer is depleted. Another contributor to the World After COVID project is Michelle Gelfand, professor of psychology at the University of Maryland. She believes that we will emerge with a greater feeling of gratitude. She says, quote, "When we've been faced with a collective disaster, we really begin to appreciate the small things in life that we've taken for granted. I think we're going to be more grateful for a variety of things, even for things like eating out, going to concerts, being able to hug our friends again and our loved ones, and even for speaking in a crowded subway. In that sense, I think it's going to produce a lot of collective gratitude," unquote. And finally, Evgeny Osin, associate professor of psychology at the Higher School of Economics in Moscow, offered this, quote, "During this lockdown, we have learned to be more flexible and more efficient. We have learned to be more tolerant of one another, to accept the unavoidable limitations in ourselves, in our colleagues, in our significant others, and being reminded that our powers are limited, that life itself is limited. This can help us to become more mindful of our priorities and to be more aware of where we choose to invest our time. Connectedness, gratitude, tolerance, not a bad outcome if we can sustain it. Times of war and famine and plague force people to face the prospect of death. Times of crisis expose the fragility of life. These wider crises can affect people in ways that are similar to what people go through when they suffer a heart attack or survive cancer or lose a close family member. It's something that most of us can usually ignore in our daily routines, but when we look at the death counts on the front page of the newspaper every day, we lose the ability to completely ignore the prospect of death. This constant reminder of the fragility of life opens us to questions of purpose of life. Serene Jones, president of the Union Theological Seminary, suggests that, quote, "Being forced to reckon with death on a massive scale compels Americans to wonder why they're here, what purpose their lives hold. People ask, what does it mean to live a good life and be good to people? These are deeply religious questions and will have a profound impact on the spiritual sensibilities of an entire nation." A Pew Research Center poll found that 25% of respondents declared that the virus has deepened their faith. According to Gallup, 19% say their faith has gotten better. These are statistically significant findings. Among African Americans who have suffered disproportionately during the pandemic, 41% say their faith has grown stronger. We shouldn't expect our pews to be full anytime soon, but we do have an opportunity individually to find new ways to practice our faith principles. We can learn some lessons about how we live our lives, about the kinds of connections that we want to nurture, and about how we care for our elderly and vulnerable, about how we treat the people who provide us with basic but critical services every day, and about how we bring our spiritual lives into our everyday lives. Changing the world is hard work, probably impossible. But what we can do is change ourselves. Resist resuming your pre-COVID habits and routines and attitudes before you once again become captive to the tyranny of those habits, routines, and attitudes. Pray or meditate. Set aside some quiet days to be alone in your thoughts. Walk. Continue your new hobbies. Slow down. Create and maintain connections with others. Protect your health. Be grateful. Practice tolerance. Make a list of what you want to shed and what you want to keep. Think about how your faith or spiritual practices will be shaped by the shared experiences we've been through. Think about how you can learn new routines for practicing gratitude, connectedness, and tolerance. We owe it to those who have died or been scarred by the virus or who have lost loved ones to move on to a better place in our hearts. What does it mean to live a good life and to be good to people? The Institute for the Future is a Silicon Valley futures organization that teaches people foresight. I want to leave you this morning with a quote from the executive director of the Institute, Marina Gorbis. She says, quote, to paraphrase Margaret Mead, we are all immigrants to the future. None of us is a native in that land. The very underpinnings of our society and institutions, from how we work to how we create value, govern, trade, learn, and innovate, are being profoundly reshaped. We are all migrating to a new land and should be looking at the new landscape emerging before us, like immigrants, ready to learn a new language, a new way of doing things, anticipating new beginnings with a sense of excitement, if also with a bit of understandable trepidation. Amen. Please join me by rising in our final hymn, number 131 in the gray hymnal, Love Will Guide Us. This morning with the words from Charles Bukowski. Think about saving yourself, your spiritual self, your gut self, your singing magical self, and your beautiful self. Save it. Do it. Do it. Amen. Please be seated. seated by the post.